bike type equals factor type. So let's start with that. It's the most basic thing we're doing, right? I'm just resetting type to be a factor now. Two things happen. Let's see. So one, it printed it out. Okay? Usually a sign that you didn't reassign it to something. Okay? So we just mutated it, but if I look at bike right now, nothing's changed on it. It just showed me what the potential change would look like. Now let's see. Type, we see FCT, which means it's a factor now. So if we did that, great. Let's try that out. We say bike equals this. Could have piped it in. Doesn't matter. In this case, I'm just putting it as the first. So talk about why I'm getting those messages. But let's see bike. So let's view bike again. So the problem with the viewer is it doesn't show you that. So now when I look at bike, it has stuck. It actually made the change. It overwrote that data set. This is now factor. So if I extract, we can either use pull. Let's say pull type. That'll grab the type, and we see now the levels are this. Bike boulevard, bike lane, so on and so forth. So many times, you do not want this to happen. You do not want these levels to be the default levels, right? So I spoke to a couple students. So why is the importance of the order of the levels, or why is the order of the levels important? There are two main reasons I would say. When you start doing tables and tabulations, many times you want them in the same order, right? Table 1, table 2, table 3, whatever. You want this thing to be ordered the exact same way, right? In a specific way. And you don't want to just be alphabetical, because alphabetical usually has no inherent meaning. The second thing, when we start to do models, when you do a logistic regression or a linear model or something like that, usually the first level is treated as the reference. Right? So maybe you want the untreated group, or maybe you want, the medium level or something like that, always to be the reference level, and all the odds ratios and risk differences or whatever to be in reference to that. So the way you do that in R is you create a factor with the levels in the order in which you want them, and the first level being the reference level. So that's why factors are important, not only for tables and models, but that's why they're important, creating them in the levels that you want, because tables and models do them in a very specific way. And then lastly, plots. You create a factor, you have in a specific order, you plot it 10 different ways, it always orders those things in the exact same way. Now, let's go back. All right, so here we created type to be a factor, but we gave it no levels. So it just does alphabetical order. And in this case, for bikes, that's probably fine. But let's say for something else, we're like, actually, I want it to be ordered by something else. So let me just look at B types. So this is, again, these are all B types. So these are all the levels of the bike lanes, bike lane type, sorry. So now I'm going to say I want to mutate this data, I want to create a factor, and I want to give it specific levels. Just make it a little easier to read, and paste those in there. So if I do this, this is the exact same thing. Exactly the same thing that was going to happen before, because these are sorted and they're sorted, and the way we sort characters is alphanumeric, just the way, this exact same way factors are going to do it if you don't give it the levels. But in this case, I said, let's make side path the first one. So I ordered that around, okay? I'm missing a parenthesis somewhere. Oh, all right, another thing. So let's say you've executed a command, and you're like, I did it. And you still see this plus here. That means R is waiting for something. That means you probably have some sort of thing off in your code, and in this case, I was missing a parenthesis. So sometimes you'll get this error or this red thing or a triangle thing. So what happened was, and if you scroll through these things, you scroll through the parentheses, this parenthesis ends this statement, this parenthesis ends that statement, you should see it up here, and I don't have one to encapsulate the mutate. So if you get into this case where it's like, oh no, like I can't get out of here, just hit escape. Try again. So then you see the greater than sign. We are back in business. We're in the R console. So here, let's run this now. And look at, I'm just going to look at bike type. Now we see exact same data, nothing changed about like this one didn't turn a like bike path or anything like that, but now the first level is side path. Okay? So the factor command works on vectors, and in order to do that in the dplyr way, you have to use mutate. But if you want this thing to stick, you have to reassign it. And now, I'm going to run everything up until here again. So I'm refreshing the entire data. Nothing's been changed to factor. So I'm going to show you the difference. Right? If I say bike $count, right? We see bike boulevard, bike lane, contrail, all that fun stuff. Note, if I didn't make it into a factor, when it created this count, this little table, did it in alphabetical order. Now I'm going to overwrite it as a factor with the specific levels we talked about. Now if I do the counting, nothing has changed, like the counts are still the same, but now side path is first. I could put them in any order I want. So the difference also is this is still a factor when you create the counts. Okay? So we reorder the thing, now all tables, now all plots, now all the things we ever use with type will now work in a specific order. Table will do that as well. So now, okay, little side about table. So we've been talking about how to do things in a tidy way, all this kind of stuff. Count is a great function. Why do we teach a table, right? It's like, okay, this is a base R way. It's like maybe these guys learned R a long time ago, thought it was useful. No. Table is useful on its own for two very important reasons. One, a lot of statistical tests, you can put a table into it, but you can't put a data frame like this. So like a Fisher's exact test, right? A chi-square test, things like that. Right? You put that into one of these statistical tests, you can put a table in there, but if you try to put this data frame up here, it's going to tell you, I don't know what you're doing. Right? This doesn't make any sense. That's not a table. That's not how you specify this test. The other reason we harp on tables so much, and the NAs, right, which we'll show in the next section, is because the statistical test for frequency tables is determined very specifically by the rows and columns. So if you do a test on this table, right, and see if the frequencies are equal, right, or what really comes into play is like a 2x2 table. So if you have a two-way table, if you have a two-way table where a column of there has NA rows and other ones don't, and I mean that in the sense it counted how many values are missing, versus if you didn't include those in there, those will give you two totally different answers, two totally different statistical p-values. The reason for that is, one is let's say there's 3 levels on X and 3 levels on Y. One is a 3x3 table, and let's say there's missing values in X but not Y. That is a 4x3 table. That has different things, right? If you remember the chi-square statistic and all that fun stuff, calculating things like that. So NAs matter for two very, very important reasons. One, statistical tests and tabulations and stuff like that can be totally different. Secondly, many times they will screw up your counts, or they are data that needs to be cleaned, or like they should be missing or they shouldn't be missing, or you have to work them up some way in your statistical analysis. So that's why we still use table in many respects, even though if you're trying to do tabulations and reporting, the dplyr way is usually a lot cleaner, a lot easier, but table is still important and crucial to learn for the statistical tests. Yes?
Sorry, did you say that NA are explicitly are removed from the tables when you ever use table, or they are included?
So by default, so if you say table, bike, type, there's no NAs in there. So that's what this use NA option, if any. So by default it doesn't have NAs in there. And I think one of the motivating reasons for that is because many times when you do it across tab and you're doing a test on that, you don't want to explicitly look at the distributional differences of missingness, because that's That's not what you're really testing for.
Is there any way to see how many NAs were removed, like how many missing data points there are in these tables?
So, I mean, if you use NA equals if any, it'll show you this column, this one. But unless you change that option, no. Count on the other hand, when you run count on type, it explicitly, it'll give you this warning message. So factor type contains, so when it was turned into a factor, if it's not a character, it's different. Factor type contains implicit NAs, right, which means there's missing values in that. Consider using forecats, : FCT explicit NA. So if we look at that function, that pretty much will say like, hey, I'll turn your missing values into a level for you if that's what you want. And sometimes that's what you do. When you plot or do tables, sometimes that is what you want. You want to do a table where it says missing or something like that. So what this will do if you put in, well, let's just try it. I'll show you what it does. So if we mutate it, let's do bike, mutate, type equals forecats, factor explicit NA type. And then I'll do count type again to make a little tabulation. Oh, I need bike in there. Bike. Okay? Now, instead of that NA, it'll have a row that says missing instead of NA. Okay? So, again, table does not include NA by default. The reasons for that are kind of the motivating statistical tests many times, or it assumes you've done some cleaning on your own. But just be aware of that because we are teaching you table because that will be useful for the testing aspect of this. But when you're doing reporting and stuff like that, count works just fine. Count works really well and kind of fits into everything we've kind of taught you so far. Okay? Any questions on these two so far? Does it make sense? So again, the reassignment, the factors level. Again, the whole messages of this are when you want to create a factor, use the factor function, put in whatever column you want, and then you can specify the levels. And then the next question, we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to leave out some of the levels. Okay? So here, we gave you a little less information, right? A little less copy and pasting. So we're going to say mutate type 2 equals factor type. So we're creating a new column. The levels are only side path, bike boulevard, and bike lane. So why are there things coming up on mine that aren't coming up on yours? So honestly, we have said that R is a changing landscape, and that is not a joke. Like literally today, like while I was sitting here, a person in our faculty talked about this this package that I never heard of, but I think it would be useful, for example, for you today. So everyone, let's go to Tools, Install Packages. This is not installed with what we've tried before. It's called Tidy Log. Okay, so try this one, Tidy Log. So it'll give you a little bit more information for what actually is happening in the background for your tidy operations. So for mutating, and when we talk about merging and joining data, it'll be really useful. So hopefully this doesn't explode. Okay, so you should get something like that. Okay, so again, it's installed on your computer now. And if you say library tidy log, it might give you a whole big message saying a bunch of stuff. So if you have that loaded, crap. So you have to load that after, you have to load that after the tidyverse. So if you load up tidyverse, or if you restart your session, or if it made you restart your session, you should be able to run everything up until this point. Everything up until this point again, using this little arrow. So if you say library tidy log, you should get this huge warning, or this huge message. Don't worry about that for now. So what I'm saying is, when you do mutations or things like that, you'll have more information saying mutate new variable type 2 with 4 unique map values and 50% NA was created. So we just created this factor. But so again, going back to what we're teaching here, factor, we set levels, but there's a whole bunch of other data in type that isn't in these levels. So if you leave off levels, what it will do to that variable is now create a whole bunch of NAs. Won't give you, I mean, this tidy log thing will give you a warning, but there's no warning. It'll just give you a message. Right? So you can do that, but I'm just saying this can cause a lot of problems if you're creating missing values in there. So the message I'm trying to hammer home is if you're specifying the levels, make sure you cover all the levels of this variable. And if you don't, make sure you know you're making missing values, and if that's what you want to do, fine, but many times it's not. And again, table. So now if you're like, okay, I have bike type and how, some other factor, and I want to do a statistical test on this type versus the other thing, I have a factor and all that kind of stuff. This is going to be a 3 by whatever table, but you're going to be missing 1,000 observations now. Okay? Is that clear? Ish. Okay. Okay. So, let's look at bike. What kind of data is date installed? So you should have it on your machine. What's it say on yours? It says date, numeric. So if I say class, bike, date installed, we get a numeric. If I just look at bike, you should see all the way down here, you see date installed as a double or numeric, right? So if I said like qplot, x equals date installed, data. So if I just piped bike in the qplot, I think you actually have to say data equals bike installed. Am I missing something? Oh, bike installed. Yeah, there you go. If I look at that, it's like, okay, did a histogram. Something's gone a little bit off, right? So not surprising, right? This is some data from city government, right? Some of the date installs says 0, right? So unless it was installed, I don't know about you, but I don't think those bike lanes were installed 2,000 years ago. So most likely that's a data entry error, things like that. But you see, it's treated as a number. So what we want to do, here's an example. We're going to turn it into a character. Okay? Later, we're going to show you how to work with dates and why we need this as a character. But sometimes we just say we're making this change right now because in the future we're going to turn this thing into an actual date. So let's say bike. We're going to mutate date installed and as.character date installed. So again, I didn't reassign this to anything, so all it's going to do is print out something and show me what the result would be. So again, nothing's really changed except these 3 letters down here are no longer DBL for double. It is a character. So, although the reading of data is sometimes smart, right? All those numbers in there, it guessed it was a number, but it guessed wrong. Okay? That's not a bad thing. Didn't lose any data. Just says like, actually, I don't want you treating that thing as a number. That's not correct yet. So if we want this to stick, again, we have to reassign it to bike. Okay? So it says converted date installed from a double to a character. And again, most times, be like, actually, you know what? I want it as a number. It's probably better. So you can do, if you can spell, most times this is what you're doing. Taking something that was a character, that you're like, those are all really numbers, and I'm turning it into a numeric. Okay? But I don't want to do that because we're factoring it later. So, now we're going to say, okay, let's just turn it into a factor. Okay, now it's a character. We're just going to turn this thing straight up into a factor. So what am I going to put in here? So those are the levels. What's the first argument of factor? The variable itself. So in this case, date installed. So if I do that, nothing's changed. Everything's printed out. But again, we see now it's FCT versus character. So if I want that to stick, then if I run this command, we'll actually see it printed out differently. We see levels. So again, this is also a gut check easy way to see if something is a factor or a character. We don't see quotes around things, and factors have things called levels. So level 1 is 0, level 2 is 2000, 2000, and all the way up to 2013. Yes.
Can we do this as a factor?
As that factor will do this in the exact same way, but as that factor doesn't allow you to specify the levels, and factor does all that you really need. So that's why as that factor generally is not something we recommend. So factor, like even if the thing is already a factor, so I can do this again, right? So this command made it a factor. Let me do this, for example. So don't worry about that. So let's say I'd say the levels are this. So what I'm demonstrating here is even though date installed already was a factor from this command up here, right? I made it into a factor. So it's a little hard to read. So I made it into a factor here with certain default levels. I don't have to turn it back into a character, then turn it into a factor. I can just say factor again, right? Factor works on anything essentially, characters, numeric, or also factors that already exist where you just want to re-level them. Okay? So here, but in this case, I actually removed the 0. So again, it dropped that category or it turned it into an NA. Okay? So I don't want to do this because I don't think that's what we're demonstrating here. I'm just going to run everything up to here. Okay. Now, this is the data. First row has a value of 0, 2010, 2010, 0, 0, but it's got levels. This is a factor. Now, run this command. If we run this command, head as that numeric byte date installed, what do you think we'll get? 0, 2010, 2010, 0? Spoiler, that's not what you're going to get. So it's a factor. The way R sees it, is what level is this? Level 1, level 6, level 6, level 1, level 7, level 3. So if you do accidentally do as dot numeric on a factor, this is what you're going to get out. Even though every single thing you saw looked like a number, R said, hey, I treat factors differently. And you do that, this is what you get. If what you really wanted to do when it was a factor was turn it back into 0, 2010, 2016, all that kind of stuff, you have to first turn that into a character, then turn it into a numeric. So it's a two-stage process. So creating factors is totally fine, but if you want to go back from a factor, it's a little bit more complicated, more steps are kind of involved. But if what you do, so if you understand conceptually that R sees factors just as level 1, level 2, all the way up to whatever number of levels, and some label on top of that, this should make some sense, right? So does that make some sense? Because that's the way R sees it. So all I'm trying to say is, as that numeric is great, it turns things into numbers, but if you do that on a factor, it's not going to do what you expect. Okay? All right, let's go through. All right, try D. Not surprising. I mean, I've already kind of spoiled it, I guess. If you do this, what do you think you'll get? the original numbers back. Turn anything from 0, 2010, all that kind of stuff. So you turn it into a character. So now this one step here takes byte date installed. So even though it was a factor, it'll now change it into the level that it was. The level is 0, 2010, whatever. Then we do as that numeric, and it'll turn it into a number again. Okay? So take home messages. Use the factor command. If you don't specify levels, they are going to be in alphabetical order. Generally, that's fine, but probably not what you want. If you want them in different orders, use the levels argument in factor. Now, if you cover all the levels, totally fine. If you don't, anything in that vector that is not in the levels gets wiped away and turned into NA. All right? And if you want to come back from a factor, it's possible, but it might not be as intuitive as you think. All right. Any more questions before we move on? So pretty much if, yes.
If you were doing something like status, like or good, like great. So how would that be a factor, right?
You can turn if it was a character of like poor, good, great, and you turn it into a factor. It would depend on how you want to specify the levels. Well, let's say you would say levels equals. You could say poor, good, great. You could say great, good, poor, or whatever order you want them in.
So you want it like in state, I think you have to do like 1, 2, 3.
Yes.
You have to do that.
No. That's the big gain of factors in the surface data. Is like now you don't have to remember which order you put them in. It's like now if you say like let's do a table or count how many are in level 5. You don't have to remember what level 5 is if it's like great. Like you just say find the cases where this column equals great. Equals great. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah. So let's say you want to split the data, you want to filter only the rows where people have a status equal good. Doesn't matter if good is a character or a factor. Though it treats the numeric thing differently for factors, it says like, oh, I want to look for whoever it says great. You don't have to say level equals 5 and always have to keep a book in your head as to what level is what. Okay, first part was really what to do, how to do it, what to do, what we recommend. Here are things very much what not to do. Okay, there's a lot of, again, the flexibility comes with some power to do wrong, I guess, in R. So here, just have a vector. Right? We're not talking about a data set, just a vector CC, which is a bunch of case control data. So, one of the downsides of having case control data are the names case control. CA comes before CO. So if you just make it a factor, case, control, but the levels are case control. That's what you want. Great. Most times what we're reporting, control is the reference level. So you usually want to flip those levels. How do you do it? Run factor with the levels in there. What you don't do is run the levels command where you reassign it. This exists. The levels command is good to grab what levels are on the factor. If you write level CC, right, if I run this and I say level CC, it's great. Gives me back level CC. Great. Tell me what the levels are. Okay? Levels is great for extracting the levels. Levels is not good for replacing them. So what did this do? We said level CC is equal to control case. That's what I want the levels to be. Now look at the data. Yeah, the levels are right, but now it's just flipped all of your labels. First record used to be case, now it's control, case control, case control. So, I mean, I don't know if you, so there are at least, I can think of like probably 3 to 4 cases in the news or like retractions and stuff like that where like, this is what happened. They said, this drug has such a great effect on these people and it actually was detrimental because someone flipped the labels. Okay? If nothing else, if you're not going to check anything in your data over and over again, recheck the labels of case control if you have outcomes. Because otherwise, you could screw up a lot of stuff. If you screw up that, everything's broken. So, again, levels good for extraction, really bad for doing this. If you want to do this, just use the factor command like we showed you before. Just like this. Okay, so if we took, we say factor and give it the factors we want and the levels in the way we want it, and then the data is exactly what it should be, but the reference category is now controlled. So there are ways to create ordered factors. I generally don't use those, but it's not bad for like gradients, like poor, good, medium, high, things like that. And the utility of those sometimes when you're actually doing filtering, you could say something like, give me the records that are greater than low. You can actually put like factor greater than low, and if it's ordered, it will understand that. Okay? But for the most part, I would say I only use ordered factors if there are more than two categories, and if there is a clear gradation. But even then, I generally don't do that. If I were to say, give me the records where it's great, it's higher than low, I would use percent and percent. I would say, like, give me the case control, percent and percent, great, excellent, whatever, rather than doing like a greater than or equal to sign with an ordered factor. But you can do that. There is a relevel function, but again, I would always recommend, if you want, just to use the factor function. Okay? The 4cats package, again, we're not going to cover it in much detail at all, but really it provides a nice framework to do things the right way and very intuitive function names and things like that, where they all start with FCT for factor. So if you want to say FCT level, you can give it the vector, and then you just say what is the baseline category, and it will reorder it for you. Because most times, I would say most times I don't care about 2 through whatever number of levels. I only care which one's the first one. So FCT level will do that for you, where you pass in the baseline. Okay? So again, don't use levels to assign things. It can cause really big problems. Do use the factor function or the factor relevel function. But again, the levels function can give you the output. So there are some other nice functions that the 4cats package gives you. FCT underscore infreq will factor the data in frequency, like a frequency ordering, which is sometimes what you want. FCT underscore lump, which will lump things pretty much. You can specify how many things you want to lump together. So if you want to say like 1 and 2, keep them as is, but everything else lump into an other category, stuff like that. There are some useful functions in that capacity because that's what you want to do many times, and they make it just easier to do. Again, I've already showed you if you do as not numeric on a factor, it'll give you the index for which level it is. If you do as not character, it'll give you the label itself. And then I think pretty much that is it for part 1. So let's go to the lab for part 2. So it's going to be one question, so we'll give about 6 or 7 minutes. We'll regroup at 10:40. Yeah, I know. Let's see. What size of it? 20. Yeah. Okay. So 7. Great. That up.
So I'll go through those.
10 minutes.
Yeah. You want time. Yeah. So 10. What's part 3? So it's the dates. It's the easy date. So then it's like 50. So 10. So 40. So I'll probably get tomorrow. guess I'm not sure what it was up here, but yeah, like just I guess we just understand that this function is which must go over what you did. So like let's say yeah. So let's say so you might make it very things like y. So let's just say something like that, or you want to do a test or you want to filter based on that. Say, I don't want to filter like that. Then it's going to give you, then it's going to give you, so you have two, this is true. Let's say this is a lot. So it's also useful in the tree. It's also it's very useful in complex existence. So let's say you want to say I want to keep x so instead so it allows you to so it allows you just to see that the variable is yeah, I mean if you have one level it's fine. But if you see it's usually more usually right now. Then the problem is that like you want to load the key in the process. If you want to get me here that like convert that to a character, well, it's a factor. Get that. We're going to show that right now. This is the last part. Specific analysis workflows that you see on sites that are pretty good. Yeah, there's one. You want to move more in depth with Sarah classes now, like computer science or do a little bit.
All right, let's talk through some of these parts of this question. So okay, so right now we're just resetting type to be a character. All right, we're not keeping it as a factor. So let's just say we're going to convert back type back to a character, right? So this is just resetting it. It's no longer a factor, right? So if it was already a character, that's fine. But if it was a factor before, it's now a character again. We don't necessarily need to do that, but I will say this. When you're manipulating the actual values when you're manipulating the actual data inside of a vector, like you're changing this value to something else, you don't generally do that on a factor. You generally will do that on a character, right? You say, I want to replace this with something else. Because the reason for that is, if it just so happens you replace something in type that isn't a level of that factor. So you created something new or something different. If it's not a level in there, it's going to say, I don't know what level to put this in. I'm going to turn it into NA. So you can change things, but I would generally change them on a character. So again, there are some other functions that might be more worthwhile than the ones we're going to suggest to you here for creating an other category. So let's make a column type 2 replacing the old one, the old type 2. Again, we don't have to remove it or anything like that. If we say type 2 is equal to something, it's going to wipe out whatever was there before using mutate, where if the type is one of these categories, contraflow, shared bus, bike, sharrow, side route, call it other. You can use %, %, and if else. So one way you can do that. So bike, again, we're reassigning it. We're creating or changing a column called type 2. And now we're saying is equal to if else. So which is like an if statement. So if type is in any of these categories, it'll come up true. Otherwise, it's going to come up false. So remember, if else, give a test, and then say, what do you want it to be if it's true? You'd say other. Now, all these will now be called other, and then you have to put something for what happens when that's not true. What happens to all the other categories? What you do is you just say, leave it as is. Replace it with type. So you're saying, is type in any of these? Yes, put other. Otherwise, keep it as is. Okay? So that has changed the data inside of there inside of each, now type 2 has, doesn't have contraflow, doesn't have shared bus bike, doesn't have shower, doesn't have sign route. So if we say table, bike, type 2, we see now that bike boulevard, bike lane, other, side path, things like that. So we've grouped it in there, and then we can factor it again, okay, with these categories together. Now in for cats, so that is a standard way of doing it, and again, there's like many ways to do the same thing in R, which is somewhat of the problem. The reason we don't show you only these very bespoke, specific solutions is sometimes we want to do something that doesn't fit into them. But in this very specific case, we have something. So here, I'm going to make a column called type 3, which is just the factor. Again, it's going to be in the alphanumeric order. That's fine. Then I'm going to use this function called fct_other. So if we look at the help file, so again, if you want to look at the help file for a function, question mark, fct other, whatever function you want to look at. So just a question mark at the very start of a line should bring up the help file. So the help file will tell you what package something is in, what is the function name, what does it do, what is the description, how do you use it with the arguments, and then what do the arguments mean. So f is a factor or a character vector. Keep, drop, will preserve, listed levels, blah, 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 blah. So it's saying, what do you want to keep? Give me a vector of the things you want to keep, or give me the things you want to drop, or both. And then it says, what do you want to put in the other level? What do you want to call the other level? By default, it's going to say other with a capital O and lowercase ther. In this case, what we want to do is take this factor, drop everything else in contraflow, shared bus, sign route, all that kind of stuff. And any of those, I want to assign it to other in all caps. Okay? So we talked about FCT lump. Here's one where you just say anything not in, or anything in this list of drop, turn it to other. And if I say table, bike, type 3, we see that other is in that data set, and there's if we try use NA, we still have those 9 missing values, but it didn't create missing values for contraflow and all that kind of stuff. So if we view, so if I say bike type 3, punch to the head of it, it'll show you the levels for that, and again, the levels are bike boulevard, bike lane, side path, because when I just said factor here, it put it in alphabetical order, but when I lumped everything else together into one category, it created them all. They put them all into the other category. Okay? So again, this might be less intuitive, but if you're especially learning stata and you're learning things with like replace if and stuff like that, sometimes to kind of keep things conceptually the same, where you're replacing something if something is the case, this might make more sense. So you're replacing type 2 equal to, or sorry, you're saying if type is not in any of these, just keep it as it is, but if it is, give me a new category for that. So again, yep.
Is there something easier that you can just say replace NA with X?
You can. There is a replace NA function, but that's not what we're doing here. We're not replacing NAs with other.
Right.
Yes. So if you want, so there's a replace NA function.
But we just had NAs, and I just wanted to make that other instead.
Yes. So that's just so we're clear. That's a very different thing than what we're doing here.
Yes.
Okay. But now let's say I also want to put the NAs to other, right? So bike, let's say mutate type 3, let's say, right? The one where we had all the other ones aggregated to other. Replace NA type 3, sorry. And then you want to say that's other, for example?
And that would be it. Type with an E.
Type with an E, replace with a P. Okay. So that now, if we do the table on that, those should have been put into that last category. Okay? So that is so good thing you brought it up. Good thing to do. Make sure you know what you're doing right, obviously. Because it might not be, right? We don't know what those were. But if, like, for example, a lot of times when you read data in, it's like a 9 or a 99 or a 999 if something's missing. And like if you had replaced those with NA or somehow they were NA and you know that they should be something else, then yeah, that's the way you do it. But in this case, we're saying lump all these into the other. In this case, we're saying also throw the NAs into other. Okay? We could have also said like unknown or something like that if you wanted to have a different level. But the problem with that is I believe that level doesn't exist, so I would use the forecat stuff. But. Okay. Again, factors seem super complex, but more or less what you want to do most of the time is just create a factor with the first level to be what you want. Everything else can generally stay the same. And there's a lot of utility in them for when you model, when you plot, when you do tables. Okay? All right. We're going to use a package called Lubridate. Right? So it's to lubricate things with data, right? So it's to make things easier. Right? Probably one of the best packages I've ever seen on dates, period. So it can convert almost anything within reason. That reason can be widely stretched in some of the data you have. So here we're just using some of the circulator data set. So circ is what the data set's called, and it has a column for date. Okay? The dates are in this format, 1/01, da-da-da-da. Lubridate isn't going to solve your problem if you don't know which is month and which is year, or sorry, which is month and which is day, up until a point. So if you only had dates up until the 12th of the month, and you don't know which order it is in, you're done. You can't figure it out. It's almost impossible unless you know other information. But if you do know some things where, you know, I know the first thing's the month, the second thing's the date, and the third thing's the year, that's fine. They will not solve your problems of like these for, you know, some of them have day month, some of them have month day. We don't really know which ones. Like that is a gross data entry issue that you need to resolve outside of this, but it will do its best. So the Lubridate package has functions that will correspond to almost any date format in the order in which they are. So, for example, MDY for month, day, year. They have a YMD. They have DMY. Every combination you can think of those. Okay? In this case, I know it's month, day, year. So in order to convert this thing into a date, I say, again, mutate the data set. I'm creating a column, new date 2 equals MDY, month, day, year. And I'm putting in this column, and I'm reassigning it so it sticks. And now if we look at it, it looks somewhat similar to this, but the format has changed. But I will tell you, it looks like a character, but it is not. It is a date object. You can do like subtraction on this, things like that. And if you do range is a numeric operation. You want to know what the lowest or the highest is. You do range on the date, it'll tell you that it goes from 2010, the 11th of January, to March 2013. Okay, so this is now a date object. Yeah.
So I don't know, like, did we change the data set because the dates are coming different?
We changed it very significantly. They're now recorded as a date object.
No, I understand that. But like, if we look from 1 to 6, the dates are different. Like the previous set has like 2011.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Here I sorted them. So these aren't bound. Sorry, these are not bound together. That's a good point. You have not changed the underlying data. So I was trying to say that if you try to sort a column that's a character vector, even though it looks like a date to you, it doesn't sort the right way. But when we actually convert it to a date and you actually do the range, it'll sort the right way. Arranging and that kind of stuff. So even if it looks like a date and you try to say a range on it, if it's a character, it's going to arrange it like it would any other character by certain orders like that. But if you want to order something by date correctly, you have to turn it into a date object. And once that's done, it will do that correctly. But yes, I agree. It looks like things have changed. It is not.
So on the top, you sort it that way. It'll sort anything that's ever January as first, basically.
Pretty much.
So
January 1st, right?
January 2000, January 2010
Exactly.
versus the second part where it's going to do January through December and then wrap around for the next January.
Exactly. It'll sort it correctly. And actually some data, some data in this data set is actually from 2010, and that should be ordered first. So like I said, for every combination of Y and B there's a combination of HMS. Or HM, just H for hour, minute, second. And you put an underscore between them. So in this case, this data is year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds. This is also year, month, day, hour, minute, second. But you can see the formats are very different. One, this doesn't have an extra 0, right? Somebody just put 4 in there. Here, this is slashes, this is dashes. So they're very, very, very different. But Lubriday says, as long as they're in the right format, I don't care. As long as they're correctly specified in year, month, day, and then hour, month, second. With some sort of separator. Some sort of separator. Can be dashes, can be slashes, can be periods, things like that. Okay? Now, to me, that's like magic. Because otherwise, if you have to manipulate these things yourself and have to change all the slashes, the dashes, and things like that, and put zeros in front of things and split all that kind of stuff, it is a nightmare. But now you see, it converts it into a format where it is the date, the hour, month, second in a specific time zone. Note, I tried year, month, day, and then just hour, minute. These have seconds on it. So you misspecified what kind of date it actually was. So it said, hey, you got some problems. You told me it's hour, minute. I don't know what to do. You have to specify the seconds. Yeah.
What about AM, PM? Because that's in military time.
You have to do some manipulations with the time zone and things like that. But depends on what you're doing. Sometimes that's relevant. Sometimes it's not. For plotting, sometimes it's better to have 24-hour things. So you can actually change the format. I believe in here you can specify a time zone. And then I believe you can specify, so in here, you can specify the time zone, but I'm not 100% sure if in this function you can do AM or PM for the
As long as
reformat.
you plot, that becomes your new X variable, it kind of doesn't matter as long as it has the right functionality to it. Yeah.
So if you're trying to find day and night, you could do that on the data object itself. But if for sometimes you want it plotted in a different way, like saying AM and PM, you can actually change that.
When you're doing some type of manipulation using the ones that you have down to the second, and you just want to do manipulation by month, do you have to trim, or can you just use the same?
So a lot of different ways to do it. There are functions called month, day, W day for weekday. And then you can grab hour, minute, second from that. So if you wanted that, you could do something where from this object, you just say month. Say month around that, and then you can create a column that's just going to be 2 and 9.
So there's a month function where you would put that column in, and then it would handle it only from the month when you're putting it in some other function.
If you wanted to group things by month, for example, to do that.
But if you want to subtract 2 times, it'll take that into account the month, day, year, everything. So you can get it on a month scale, for example. You don't need it on necessarily.
So if I wanted to see how many months it was versus how many days.
Yeah, it was
Yes.
36.3 months apart. But however many decimal places of accuracy.
So we'll talk about that in a second. Differences in times. Sometimes you want the actual date. Sometimes really you only want the difference. Right, so time from baseline, things like that. Okay, so we did the same thing. So here is an example of what I just did, but I just want to say the classes of these after I converted them. And if you say the class of them, you'll see these things like POSIX CT and POSIX T if it is a date time object. So here, all I'm showing you here is showing you a way to add to time. So here's a time object. This is when we ran this last. So it's a POSIX CT object, right? It has hour, minute, seconds, all that kind of fun stuff. We can add a period to that. So we say as.period. What do we want to add to it? And we can give it a whole different slew of units. So we want to add 20 seconds, we want to add 20 minutes, we want to add 20 days, 20 hours, stuff like that. So this can be, so if you see, this was in 20 minutes. So if you look at 20, 25, 20, 45, if you add 60 or 80 minutes, it's not going to like run this to like 120 or something. It'll do it correctly and put the hour over. Differences in time. So you can subtract times as well. The diff time functions is helpful, and you can get units for that, which we'll show in the second part. But otherwise, you can just take differences in time. So let's say I have this is again a character, let's say 2020, 12/31, midnight. So this is saying how many days until the end of the year, for example. So this is December 31st. I turn that into a date object using this. I say the future minus the time that we ran it. And it's about 360 days, 360.4 days from now. If we wanted the thing in a different unit, you can take a diff time, so where you put a time 1, time 2. I will say most times I think of stuff, it's time 2 minus time 1, but in diff time it is the first thing minus the second thing. So it's time 1 minus time 2, and then you can give it a unit. So instead of 360 days, you can get it in 51.5 weeks. Right? You could also convert them to numbers or things later if you want, things like that. And if you plot these, it'll work kind of as a number for the most part. Okay. So, the part on dates is relatively short for 2 reasons. One, Lubridate is really an amazing package that covers mostly what you need for almost any condition. The second thing is, when things that are problematic with dates crop up, they're almost sometimes irresolvable in code. They take much more of a person to do things. What I mean by that is you either have to split the data from different sites. If site 1, for example, put it in a specific format, and site 2 put it in a totally different format, you have to do data manipulations, and then Lubridate will solve the problem. So it's usually, when the problem is with a date, you have to do some sort of manipulation sometimes on a subset of your data that isn't universal, right? And that generally leads to more mutating or filtering or subsetting, which we've already talked about, or talking to a person saying, what are you guys doing? Use a calendar, use some sort of click box thing rather than entering it by hand.
I sent you the Lubridate cheat sheet.
Oh, okay. Can I just Google it?
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you just Google Lubridate cheat sheet, there should be a lot of different things. Time zones, time zones is a problematic thing. There's an AM and PM function. Is it AM or PM? Things like that. Is it a leap year? What semester in? What quarter? What week? What second? What hour? What minute? What day of the quarter? What day of the week? What day? Like if you want Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But like also the nice thing about that is when you use the day function, it'll grab it in like you can reorder that. And that's another thing for factors. Most times you don't want to do factor on a day of the week because it'll always put Friday first. Yeah, something like that. And not the order that you want. So I just Googled Lubridate. I think it might be on our website, but I just Googled Lubridate cheat sheet.
Forgot mine too. Forgot to. So that's probably that's 90%. So, so again, when you have the type versus install, so install, you just have to say so it's only if you don't have a user library bit. Now so that why
And let's say, or that's like,
exactly.
it's just good.
All right, so who's got a format for the first one? 3 letters. YMD. If you try YDM, it's gonna say nope, no 14th day of the month. But again, if it was 12, it's not gonna save you. Don't know which one it is unless you have extraneous information. Or if everything, so with one value itself, it's a little bit hard, but you have like a whole data set of them, you should see some big things flying up if you assume the format is exactly the same for each record. What do you got for the second one? Month, day, year. HM. So again, let's just try MDY. You're gonna say, hey, you got some space in there, you got some other stuff in there. I don't know what's going on. And I think you might ask yourself, like, well, maybe I just wanted the day. Like, well, it's trying to protect you in some respects from parsing errors and things like that, and being explicit. I believe, so as date. There's a function as _ date. Although you're like, hey, I have hour, minute, second. I parsed it as like, this POSIX day thing. I don't actually really need the times. I don't really care about them at all. So you can say as _ date, and it turns into a date object, right? Where it doesn't have any recording in the minutes, seconds, or anything like that. Okay. This one we already said, we know it's MDY. And what are you going to go with? HMS. Okay. And like I said before, you can do things like second. How many seconds? 22 seconds, right? W day. What day of the week is that? And you can say label. I think true. So W day, you get day of the week. Do you want it abbreviated? False. I want the whole day. So W day, day, month, stuff like that, you can get extracted. So you can get either things like that or things like that, whether you want it abbreviated or not. And you can see it is a factor, and it is ordered by Sunday to Saturday. Okay? So if you start plotting things, it's going to plot Sunday first all the way to Monday, or all the way to Saturday. All right. Dates, data classes in general. Any last questions before I give you off to Andrew?
can you put the day in with not as like a separate statement, but it outputs as like a single statement?
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
So like it would return like 2016-4-5 Tuesday instead of having to do the weekday, which would just return Tuesday.
So you want so YMD or MDY. So you want oh yeah. So you're saying you want okay. If you wanted the format, you're saying like label equals true. You want it Tuesday.
Yeah, so it outputs Tuesday there, right?
Yep.
Or if I want Tuesday, then this would come out with the rest of the date.
So the way this actually presents itself, the way this is actually displayed is a fixed thing in all.
Okay.
You can paste them together.
There's like a hierarchical structure for that. It doesn't include the label.
Yeah, so you could do this. Let me just do.
Just have to make a new column and then just print it.
You can do that. So you can say like, we're going to talk about pasting. X. So you can have it do that, but that is no longer like a date object. Yeah, now it's a character. So you can have that happen, but yeah, I don't think like plotting functions and stuff will keep it that way. We can create a new column that does that, but like the stuff you want to plot, you'd still have a separate column that's like in the date format.
You'd probably want to create a new column using the weekday function and then turn it into a category.
Yeah, I mean, if you're saying if you want like
Kind of depends what you use it for, but yeah.
Depending on what
yeah, but like you're saying if you want to, yeah, you could create a new column that's like day of the week, right? Where you mutate this.
I think if I looked at like how are my sales doing on the weekend?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can you could create that column and then you could filter it on only weekends or something like that.
If else Saturday or Sunday, yes. Otherwise, no. Zero.
Can you already do that without making it categorical? You can already
Weekdays or weekdays.
Weekdays.
That's by the weekend day. So it might have to.
Yeah, I don't think that's. Yeah, I think that's just a character. We use W day. I don't know. So sorry, what do you mean?
So you know how like in Excel the dates work? It's like some random number behind everything.
Yes.
That's this too, though.
So you'd have to like in Excel how I would do it is I would then copy and paste it as a value and then it would come and just be a character and then I can do my analysis, right? So can you do it already when it's in the date format, or do you have to change it to categorical and then you could look at everything by Saturday?
I would create a new column where it's like just a categorical or using either the W day function and then I would group by that. By that value, or I would keep the date object as it is, not change that, and I would